Hey, it's Aubrey. Today we are going to do a YouTube video. I'm going to answer some commonly asked questions that I've got, either from my stories or from a couple of my lives and my videos. And then I'm also going to walk you through a lot of the tools that I use. We'll go do a tour of my sewing machine, and I'll show you the area behind me where I spend the most time sewing and making. So, biggest question that I get asked is about sewing machines. Someone asked, I'm brand new to sewing, what kind of sewing machine do you recommend? I will talk about it also when I'm giving a tour of my sewing machine. It really just depends on what you want to make. For me, I did spend a little bit more money and I got a machine that could do a lot of different stitches, and it had a lot of automated features that I really loved. But it also has an embroidery component to it, and at the time that I was looking for the machine, that's something that I really wanted to look into. Now, it's probably not the same machine that I would buy because I've leaned more into quilting and creating clothing and a lot of the fun crafts that we've been able to do as I've been ditching my stash. If I were to purchase a machine now, I'd probably purchase something that has just a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch at the minimum. Maybe some of those nicer features like the auto cut, raising and lifting the needle, probably something that helps with the presser foot. If you're just getting into sewing, I wouldn't recommend going for one of the more expensive machines with lots of stitches. Just find something that has like a basic 15 different kinds of stitches that you can use. You can go on Facebook Marketplace, Walmart, Joann's, Michael's, all those websites, and just get something that's cheap that lets you start, because you're really just looking to gain more of the sewing technique, which you don't necessarily need the nicer machine to do. And then once you've made a lot and you kind of realize what you want to spend your time making, that's when I would invest in a machine that you really do love that fits the needs that you have. If you do want some recommendations, I'm not a sewing machine expert, but I'll link some in my Amazon so that you can take a look at some of them. I'll try to find some pretty decent priced ones that would function in the way that you need. I think it's a common misconception that you need a really nice machine to be able to sew. The majority of the ones I've sewn throughout this month in my Ditch the Stash series, I've never used anything besides a straight or a zigzag stitch. And basically every machine is capable of that. Some are gonna be louder, some are gonna be quieter. Like, there are some niceties that come with it, but the actual function of sewing, you're not gonna find too much difference besides more stitch options and more expensive machines. The next question that I got related to what made me even start sewing or get a sewing machine. So when I was in 7th grade, we had required sewing classes, and that's when I really learned how to sew. And I remember making stuffed animals and tote bags, and I made a blanket that folds into a pillow, and I just absolutely loved it. But I didn't keep on with it like I probably should have. And I always wanted to make a t-shirt quilt, so use t-shirts to make a rag quilt, and I was able to do that a couple years ago, and that's what really got me back into sewing. I borrowed my mom's machine. I actually broke her machine and she bought a new one, and I finished my t-shirt rag quilt, which I need to go redo because I didn't know what I was doing back then. And then I also started quilting in general, and then that led into clothes, and then more recently I've been starting to make more household items, bags, things like that. So that's kind of what got me into sewing. I also a couple years ago got into crochet and knitting, and that kind of re-engaged my love for making things. Another question I get asked all the time is, where do I buy my fabric? I don't necessarily shop at one place. I shop based on the project that I'm trying to make. If you haven't noticed from my series Ditch the Stash, I'm trying not to buy fabric because I bought so much of it, and I found that when I go casually to fabric shops, I tend to buy fabric that I don't need. So now I've been trying to shift my focus and only buying fabric with a specific project in mind, rather than just collecting trophies of fabric because they're pretty. So I do go to Joann's mostly for some pretty basic stitching items, so I get most of my thread there, notions, pins, clips, rulers, that kind of stuff. Depending on what I'm making, I'll sometimes venture into their fabric section, but very few and far between am I buying fabric from them. Mostly I'm buying from independent shops on Etsy, or there's a place that I live local to that's called Harmony, and I will tag them in my description. They do have an online store, and I love their fabric and I love their prices. So there's a couple different places. I would recommend looking for your like local quilt shops if you have any, and if not, looking to the internet. I have noticed that I shop for fabric less when I'm looking on the internet with a specific project in mind. The other thing that I would recommend is find fabric brands that you love. For me, some of my favorites are like Fabulism, Rifle Paper Co., Ruby Star Society, some of those brands, I follow them on Instagram, and then I kind of just watch and see if they have collections that come out that I love. And if they do, then I will go find authorized retailers or Etsy shops that sell that collection and that fabric. So that's another thing that I've done that's kind of helped me better curate the fabric that I'm buying, but also always buying fabric that I love and rarely settling for something that I don't love. Another question that I got is, what is my favorite thing that I've ever made? It's a toss-up, because I love everything I've ever made, but the favorite thing that I've ever made is a quilt. So I'm actually gonna stand up because it's right behind me. But I actually just finished this quilt probably a couple weeks ago, and it is a St. Louis 16 patch quilt. It is very large. I think it's like 80 inches by 80 inches. This took me over a year just because I was kind of lazy with the sewing. But you can kind of see how it's quilted. I quilted X's through every individual square, and I made it, it's infused with so much love, and my husband and I fight over who gets to have it on our couch when we're watching movies. So that's my favorite thing I've made, to date. Okay, so next we're gonna go over some of my sewing notions, things that I use around my sewing room that I think just help make the experience of sewing so much better. So to start off, we're gonna talk about scissors and blades. So this is my rotary cutter, and this is the Fiskars brand. It's a 60mm one. I don't think they sell this exact one anymore, but they sell one that's like it. And I chose it because of its grip, and it has the extender for the blade as well as the button to retract it all in your thumb. So it makes it very easy, especially if you were to have kids around, to retract the blade, rather than just like leaving it out all the time or forgetting to retract it. So this for me is a must have. It is a 60mm blade, like I said, so it is a little bit larger, makes it kind of hard to maneuver around corners sometimes. I do have another one that's like a 45mm, and I don't use it all that often. Next, for things to cut with, is a pair of fabric shears. These are also Fiskars. These, if you get a pair, which you should, only ever cut fabric with them because they will go dull if you use anything else. My favorite, they never leave my sewing room. My husband cannot use them because they will go dull. This is a more recent addition to the things that I use, but it is a set of pinking shears, and you can kind of see they're like the zigzag scissors that you didn't understand why your mom had. So these are really nice for trying to trim around fabric that you don't want to fray or that is going to fray easily. I honestly did not see the use in them until my friend Chelsea made a video about them. So I just got a pair because my Joann's had a huge sale on them. Using a pair of shears that is not for fabric. So sometimes I use this to snip thread. Sometimes this pair of scissors that I use to cut out my patterns if it's coming out of the wax paper or just standard paper. That's what I have these around for, and I made sure to grab ones that look very, very different from my fabric ones, just so I don't accidentally grab my fabric ones and then cut paper or cardboard or whatever it is. Next is a seam ripper, because we're not perfect. So I used to use the ones that come in the machine standard, and then I saw these on TikTok that are just like a better grip. This is way more comfortable and easier to maneuver than the small stick that you get with your sewing machine. I think these came in a pack of 5, and I have loved them. They're also a lot harder to lose because they're colorful. This one does have a cap on it, just so you don't accidentally poke yourself, but I don't know where it is, so it stays in my cup. Then as it comes to just things that assist with sewing that I'd recommend is definitely a seam gauge. Everyone tells you to get one of these. I recommend getting one of them, but I rarely use them. I used it a lot more before I got my large cutting table, because I kind of just eyeball things with my cutting table now, and then my sewing table also has a ruler on it. So I don't use this quite as much, but it is helpful just to kind of guess. I usually use it if I just eyeballed a seam and I want to measure what I eyeballed so I can write down for later what I used. Next is a marker. There we go. It's got disappearing ink. I don't honestly know what the difference between them is. One of them disappears with heat, one of them disappears with water. The blue disappears with water, the purple disappears with air and water. And these mark really well. This is really nice, especially, I really don't use it on anything that's gonna show exterior. I've done it one time on like a dress that I was helping someone make. I use this mostly if I'm gonna quilt. I'll use it, mark the line that I wanna base it off of. I only mark it the one time, and then it's usually on the inside of the fabric. Along with the marker, I would recommend getting a sewing guide. that's what this guy looks like. Little quilting guide. You do have to make sure you have a foot that is compatible with it. Nice thing is you can just mark one straight line with the marker, and then you can put this sewing guide on and just follow the line and just go throughout your fabric, and you don't have to mark every single thing as a line. And then the last thing that's helpful for sewing, and I highly recommend it, especially if you want to quilt or make clothes, is this thing. It's called the Big Jig. I thought it was all a joke, and it is one of the most helpful things ever. And I use it when I'm trying to go through thicker seams, and it's kind of the thicker seams where like your foot isn't engaging with the presser feet and it's not moving your fabric through, and you can lift your presser foot, slide this underneath, put the foot down, and then it helps you have more leverage to push your fabric through, and then you just pop this out and then it just sews like normal, and it's the most helpful thing ever. And then the next thing, this looks pretty messy, but I do have a little bobbin storage. Most of these I don't reuse again, and that's why I have them, but it's just helpful if you have a project where you just need extra bobbins. Most of the time I have pre-wound white ones in here. I've almost gone through all of those though, but I highly recommend it. It is helpful, just so you can kind of see what you have and don't need to rewind a bobbin every single time. Clips, guys. I use these more than pins, and they are just small little clips that you can go on to your fabric with. And this was like a pack of like 100, I think, for like 10 bucks on Amazon. I use them for quilting. Anytime I have seams lining up, anything that's edge work really, I'm using these. Anything that's on the inside, if I need to pin layers together, or if I'm sewing through fabric. For a good example is when I made this bowl cozy, I clipped when I was sewing on the outsides. When I was doing the inside pieces, I had it pinned so it wouldn't move, but I rarely use pins on the edge of fabric anymore. So that is everything that I keep usually within arm's reach when I am sewing. And I'm gonna now show you my sewing table, my sewing machine. I think that's it. We'll do a little bit of a tour, but we'll move to the next piece. Okay, so this is my sewing machine. This is the Brother SE 625. As you can see, it has this beautiful LCD screen that you can use to figure out what stitches you're going to use. It does have multiple presser foot, so it actually labeled all of them with a letter. You can tell which presser foot that you need to use with each of them. I am honestly always on just this first page of stitches. This is like the one that's set to the side, middle, and then sometimes I go over here and do the zigzags. Moving over here, this one does have speed gauges, so if I go move this all the way to the right, it'll actually limit how fast it will sew regardless of it, or push the sewing pedal all the way to the ground. This will keep it from going super fast. This is the fastest, and then there's a middle one. This is nice because if you're sewing through thicker fabric like canvas jeans, I can always set it to this one, and even if I want to press the pedal all the way to the ground, it won't go so fast that it will break my needle. This one does have auto snipping, so if you click this after you finish sewing through a piece, this will cut both the top and the bottom threads. Without you needing to even do anything, so you don't have to always use the side cutter. And then this button actually just raises and pushes down the needle. So if you can see, I can click it down, it will just push it down, pull it up, it pulls up again, just replacing it so you don't necessarily need to use the hand crank every time. This button tells you if the presser foot is up or down. It will turn green if it's down, it will turn red if it's up. And it's also the start stop button if you're using the embroidery function of this machine. So that's all the main stuff that I use on this machine. It also has the fabric cut over here that we use. And then there's also a storage component here. And one of the main things that made me choose this machine is actually that it has the bobbin casing on the top, and it's see-through, so I can actually see how much is left on my bobbin as I'm sewing, and it's a top load, so I can just pull this and access my bobbin. Versus a more traditional machine, you probably have to take off the storage component, open the door, pull the bobbin casing out, and then reload your bobbin. I didn't know it when I bought this machine, but there's actually a sensor in here, so as I am sewing, it will give me a notification on my screen saying the bobbin is running low, and it will actually stop you from sewing so that you can address that. And this is what it looks like with the embroidery attachment on. This is what's actually moving to help it embroider. It automatically will lower the feed dogs when this is placed on. So when you turn it on, it will actually sense that it's in an embroidery mode. So if I move on, you can say the carriage of the embroidery unit will move. So to stay away from the carriage, which is this. And then this is all the built-in embroidery stuff. So you can go here, we can see these are all the fonts that it can embroider that are already built in. That's all built in. It does have a USB, so if I put a USB in here with something else that I want to embroider, I can access it by clicking here and I can open up all the files. So that's kind of just a tour of this sewing machine. I have really enjoyed it so far. I like it mostly for the embroidery. If I didn't want the embroidery, then I think I would go with just a machine that can do straight or zigzag stitches. I don't really think that all that this offers is great, but it's not necessarily important for learning to sew or sewing the stuff that I make. Okay, so now we're on the side of the sewing room that you guys don't see as much. It's usually where I'm filming from. This is where my sewing machine used to be. I moved it under the window just about a week ago. And then I have all my quilting rulers, everything that I use on a stand over here. We have an extra table light. I have my speakers. There's a little Wi-Fi hub. And then my sergers over here, all of my thread. We have a full-size mirror so I can do checks to see how things are fitting. And then we have some just general decor. These are all gifts from people. They're all Funko Pops of TV shows that I love. And then some beautiful artwork, and it's like heavenly figures that are knitting and quilting, and it turns into the sky. Well, I think that's about it for this video. Thank you guys for hanging out with me, getting to know me a little bit. Going through my sewing room and looking at some of the stuff. I've really been surprised with how many people are interested in the small things that I'm sewing to ditch my stash. But if you guys have any ideas or any patterns that you think I should try, definitely let me know. We do have lots of fat quarters to get through and a couple larger pieces of fabric, so I'm really excited to see where it takes us. I right now have my sights set on planning a quilted jacket, and I also have my sights set on a lounge set, because I just bought some fabric, which I'm not supposed to do, but bought some fabric. It was really cozy and it was super cheap. So stay tuned. Let me know what you guys are interested in, especially on YouTube. I had a lot of requests to go to YouTube for people that aren't using social media. So I am working to get my Ditch the Stash videos moved over here. But there were some issues with some of the music from TikTok that is copyrighted. So I kind of have to re-edit all of them, which will take a little bit of time, but I'll slowly get everything migrated over here. But please feel free to follow along and let me know if there's anything that you guys would like to see. Have a good day, guys.